Emma Walker stepped onto the bustling tarmac of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, her backpack slung casually over one shoulder. She wasn't dressed for attention-worn jeans. A faded hoodie and sneakers scuffed from weeks of travel were hardly the attire of someone accustomed to the luxury of first-class cabins. In fact, she looked exactly like the kind of traveler who had accidentally wandered into the wrong line. Ordinary, nondescript, and, in the eyes of many, economically invisible. The flight to New York's JFK Airport was scheduled to depart in 30 minutes, and passengers shuffled into the boarding gate, clutching smartphones and wallets, some sipping artisanal coffee, others discussing the stock market or their latest corporate ventures. Emma moved quietly, her eyes calm and observant, as if she were invisible to the world around her. She didn't care about the stares, the whispers, or the judgments that hovered like a thick, unspoken fog over the gate area. After all, she had done this hundreds of times before, but today, something felt different. When she handed her boarding pass to the gate attendant, the woman's expression faltered. She adjusted her name tag, glanced at the electronic ticket, then back at Emma with an almost imperceptible sneer. "Ma'am, this isn't your seat," the attendant said. Her tone clipped, professional, yet tinged with the faintest hint of disdain. Emma's lips curved into a polite, unreadable smile. "It is," she replied softly, her voice calm, collected, betraying none of the simmering irritation that could have easily flared. The attendant's eyes narrowed. "I'm going to need you to step aside while we check your ticket," she said, motioning to a small alcove near the counter. Emma obliged, her movements fluid, unhurried, almost theatrical in their serenity. People passing by glanced at her curiously, noting her casual attire in contrast to the tailored suits and designer handbags surrounding her. Whispers followed her like shadows. Within seconds, another attendant approached, this one carrying an air of authority. He scanned Emma up and down, his brow furrowing as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. "Sir, I think we have a situation," one whispered. Emma's calm demeanor never wavered. She merely stood there, folding her arms lightly across her chest, letting the absurdity of the moment settle naturally. Then came the security officers. Two uniformed men, their expressions a mixture of routine and suspicion, approached her. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one said firmly. Emma tilted her head slightly, studying them with a gentle curiosity. "Of course," she replied, her voice quiet but imbued with a kind of unshakable authority. The officers exchanged a brief, confused glance, but continued to escort her. Passengers nearby began to murmur. "Probably snuck into first class," a man whispered to his companion, shaking his head in disbelief. "Looks like she can't even afford a regular seat," someone else muttered, their voice dripping with judgment. Emma's face remained a mask of composure. She didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, and certainly didn't argue. If anything, her serenity only made the whispers louder. People were drawn to it. They couldn't look away, but they also couldn't place why she seemed so commanding without saying a single harsh word. The gate manager appeared, clipboard in hand, ready to intervene, or so he thought. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his tone a mixture of irritation and authority. "This passenger is refusing to comply," the attendant said, her eyes darting nervously between Emma and the approaching crowd. "We think she might not have the proper ticket." Emma handed over her boarding pass. The manager glanced at it, then back at her. His brow furrowed deeper. "Ma'am, this ticket is valid," he said slowly, as if reluctant to admit the obvious. "Then why am I being treated like a criminal?" Emma asked quietly, her eyes sweeping the terminal with a quiet challenge. There was no anger in her voice, only a piercing clarity that made those around her uncomfortable. The crowd began to notice. Some passengers recorded with their phones, intrigued by the drama unfolding. Others whispered, speculating about the woman who dared to resist the authority of airport staff. The attendant huffed, clearly unsettled. You? You don't look like someone who would afford business class, she said, a line that would haunt her later. Emma's lips curved into a faint smile. Is that so? She said softly, almost rhetorically. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. They were used to dealing with gate crashers or ticket fraud, but this calm, composed woman didn't fit any profile they had memorized. She wasn't defensive, didn't panic, and most importantly, didn't look intimidated. That was what made her unsettling. There was a quiet power in her demeanor, a subtle aura that spoke of someone who didn't need permission to exist in that space. Emma's mind wandered briefly as she considered the absurdity of the situation. Here she was, Emma Walker, born into a family that owned one of the largest privately held airlines in the United States, being treated like a trespasser by employees who had probably seen her name in the boarding system 100 times. The irony wasn't lost on her. She suppressed a chuckle, letting it remain a private thought. To anyone else, she was just another passenger. To her, it was a lesson in human behavior. The murmurs grew louder. A young man snapped a picture, whispering excitedly to his friend. Look at this. She's being kicked off her own flight. The friend laughed quietly, not fully believing it. Emma's presence had become a spectacle. She didn't move or react to the camera phones, only waited, observing. Her calm patience contrasted sharply with the flustered staff, creating a tableau that was almost theatrical. The gate manager tried again, this time more formally. Ma'am, I need you to explain yourself before you board. Emma looked at him directly, meeting his gaze with unwavering composure. I have explained myself. I have a valid ticket. I am fully entitled to this seat. Your assumption about my appearance does not override my rights as a passenger or as the owner of this airline. The words hit the room like a shockwave. A hush fell over the gate area. Passengers stopped talking, attendants froze, and even the security officers blinked, caught between disbelief and professional duty. Emma's calm, measured statement was more powerful than any outburst. It cut through the noise and laid bare the absurdity of their assumptions. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, one attendant muttered, I didn't realize. The phrase trailed off, powerless to undo the humiliation already caused. Emma simply nodded, serene, allowing the moment to hang in the air. She didn't need apologies yet. She only needed them to recognize their mistake. The officers motioned for her to follow them again, but Emma walked lightly, almost floating, confident in the knowledge that authority and assumption had been placed on the wrong person. Passengers watched in a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and embarrassment. Phones continued to record, capturing the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. No one could deny the power of presence that Emma exuded without raising her voice or making a scene. And so, Emma Walker, the woman who looked too poor for first class, stood calmly in the terminal, a figure of composure and quiet authority, waiting to see just how far arrogance and ignorance could go before meeting reality. Little did the staff or passengers know, the woman they had just attempted to remove from the plane was not only entitled to that seat, she owned the entire airline. Emma Walker stood just beyond the gate, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her expression calm as airport staff whispered furiously among themselves. 2 security officers flanked her, unsure how to handle the situation, while the gate manager adjusted his tie nervously, pretending control he didn't have. The murmurs of nearby passengers had grown louder, a mix of curiosity, judgment, and incredulity. She probably can't afford a seat here, someone whispered to a companion. Another passenger laughed quietly, shaking their head at what they assumed was a rich-looking pretender. Emma's lips curved in a polite, almost imperceptible smile. The irony was delicious. She wasn't pretending. She was Emma Walker, heiress and CEO of Walker Air, the very airline they had just boarded. Yet the crew didn't recognize her, and they certainly hadn't bothered to treat her with the most basic respect. Emma let the whispers roll over her. She had learned long ago that true authority didn't shout, it waited. It didn't argue, it observed. The gate manager cleared his throat, attempting to reclaim some shred of dignity. "Ma'am," he began, voice stiff, "we need you to explain your seat. You can't just board without authorization." Emma tilted her head, letting her gaze sweep over the passengers still staring at the scene. "I've already explained myself," she said softly, her tone even but unwavering. "My ticket is valid, my seat assigned, and I have every right to board. Are we clear?" The manager swallowed hard. Yes. But we just—" His words faltered. He had no precedent for this. Security officers looked to one another nervously, muttering, "We've never seen this happen." Then came the whispers from the crowd. Smartphones were being raised, capturing video. "Look at this. She's being kicked off her own plane." Someone exclaimed. Another added, "Is this a prank? Who even wears jeans in business class?" Emma remained silent, letting the absurdity of the situation speak for itself. She didn't need to yell or justify. Every hesitant glance from staff, every uncertain murmur from the passengers, was a confirmation of the arrogance and assumptions she faced every day in life. The attendants began to approach her cautiously, their eyes wide. One, a young woman with a perfectly pressed uniform, spoke first. "Ma'am, we need to verify." Emma interrupted politely. "I've shown my ticket. There is nothing to verify. You are assuming I do not belong here because of my appearance. That is the problem." The staff froze. The manager's face went pale. Emma's calm voice filled the small area outside the gate, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Judging people by clothes or appearance is a poor practice. It's not illegal, but it's a reflection of poor character. "And yet," she added softly, her gaze sweeping the area, "you are judging me without knowing me. That is why I am here." Passengers leaned forward, whispering into phones. Video footage spread like wildfire, even before it hit social media. Some whispered conspiratorially, "Do you think she's really the CEO? No way. This must be a joke." Others shook their heads in discomfort. The woman being publicly humiliated didn't flinch. She didn't plead. She simply stood, a quiet pillar of dignity amid the chaos of judgment. The gate manager finally stepped forward, trying to assert authority. "Ma'am, if you do not comply, we will have no choice but to involve law enforcement further." Emma tilted her head slightly, her brown eyes steady. "Law enforcement? Or common sense?" she asked, calm but pointed. "Because so far, I see neither from your staff. I only see assumptions based on appearance. That is the mistake here." At that moment, the two security officers exchanged a glance. They were trained to handle conflicts, but this was new. Usually, situations escalated when passengers were unruly or aggressive. This woman, however, was polite, quiet, and immovable. Her presence alone conveyed authority greater than theirs. Passengers were now silent, leaning on counters, watching the scene unfold as though it were theater. Emma's mind, meanwhile, wandered briefly to the absurdity of life. Here she was, removed from her own plane for looking poor, humiliated by people who had no idea who she was. The situation could have made her furious. She could have screamed, demanded apologies, or stormed off in anger. But instead, she remained composed. She wanted them to see what arrogance and prejudice looked like, unmasked. She wanted this to be a lesson, not a spectacle of her own temper. Finally, One of the attendants, voice quivering, blurted out, "Mom, I see your name on the ticket. Walker Air. Are you?" Her words faltered, uncertainty thick in the air. Emma smiled faintly, letting the moment stretch. "Yes," she said, calm, almost gently. "I am Emma Walker. I own this airline. Or at least, I should be welcome on my own plane." The words hit the gate area like lightning. Passengers' eyes widened. Phones wavered mid-recording. The manager's jaw slackened. Security officers blinked, uncertain if they should bow, apologize, or retreat. The young attendant who had spoken first went pale, stumbling over her own words. I didn't know," she stammered, unable to finish the sentence. The crowd began murmuring again, but this time with a new tone. Awe, shock, disbelief. "She owns the airline?" Someone whispered, glancing around. "I can't believe it," another added. Emma's calm gaze swept over the scene. She did not gloat. She did not relish the embarrassment of those who had humiliated her. Instead, she allowed the gravity of the revelation to speak for itself. "Your assumption," she continued, voice quiet but sharp, "that someone who looks like me does not belong in business class is exactly the problem. Respect is not determined by clothes, wealth, or appearance. It is determined by actions and by humanity." Her words hung in the air, quiet but thunderous, leaving a trail of introspection for anyone listening. The gate manager, still white-faced, muttered, We need to rectify this immediately." Emma nodded once, as if agreeing, not in triumph, but in the expectation that reason should always prevail. She wanted nothing dramatic, just justice, fairness, and recognition of the basic human principle that dignity isn't earned by wealth or lost through modest attire. Passengers were still buzzing. Some recorded videos of the confrontation, captions forming instantly in their minds. Airline CEO kicked off her own plane. Some whispered about the audacity of airport staff, others about the humility and grace of the woman standing before them. Emma's posture, calm and unshaken, became the unwritten lesson of the terminal. She didn't need to say more. The quiet authority she radiated was more powerful than any angry confrontation. Airport staff, meanwhile, scrambled. Some checked her ticket again. Others whispered urgently to managers, unsure how to proceed. Emma simply waited, serene, letting the absurdity of their behavior play out fully. She knew her moment would come. Every slight glance, every muttered word, every judgmental whisper was being recorded, not just on phones, but in memory, teaching everyone who witnessed it a lesson about humility, appearances, and respect. By the time Emma was allowed to return to the gate and reboard the plane, the entire terminal had been subtly transformed. What had begun as public humiliation became a public revelation. People whispered, stared, and recorded, unsure if they were witnessing scandal or justice. But one thing was clear. The woman they had judged for looking poor was in fact someone they could never misjudge again. And as Emma walked calmly back toward the waiting plane, flanked by officers now unsure whether to apologize or simply step aside, she felt no anger. Only the quiet satisfaction that she had allowed the world to see itself through a mirror one that reflected assumptions, arrogance, and human error back at them in the clearest way possible. Emma Walker stood just outside the gate, the chaos of the terminal swirling around her like a storm she alone seemed untouched by. Passengers stared, phones raised, whispers growing louder with every passing second. Airport staff hovered, visibly nervous, their previous confidence dissolved into uncertainty and embarrassment. Emma's calm gaze swept across the scene, steady and piercing, as if the absurdity of the moment were a private performance for which she held all the cards. Then her phone buzzed. She reached into her pocket and glanced at the screen. The name displayed sent a subtle ripple through her calm demeanor. Captain Brooks, her chief pilot and longtime friend. "Ma'am, where are you?" His voice rang through the phone, tinged with concern and just a touch of irritation. "The flight's delayed, and your seat is waiting." The gate manager, standing nearby and still reeling from the revelation that Emma owned the airline, froze. "Wait, did he just say, Mom?" he stammered, voice trembling. His eyes darted nervously toward Emma, then toward the officers, as if seeking guidance from some invisible authority. Emma's lips curved into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "Yes," she said softly, the calm authority in her voice making the manager step back instinctively. "I'm Emma Walker, the owner of Walker Air. And yes, I intend to take my seat on my own plane." The terminal fell into a sudden hush. Passengers who had been recording videos lowered their phones, jaws slack. The whispers stopped mid-sentence. People craned their necks to get a better view, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The absurdity of the situation had reached its peak. The very person they had been mocking for, looking poor, was, in fact, the woman whose name adorned every boarding pass and ticket counter of Walker Air. Captain Brooks' voice came again through the speaker. "Emma, are you serious? The staff still haven't recognized you?" Emma replied calmly, "Apparently not. They assumed because of my attire that I don't belong in business class. Funny, isn't it?" Her tone was light, almost teasing, but the undercurrent of authority was unmistakable. The gate manager's face turned several shades paler as he finally realized the full magnitude of the error. The security officer shifted uneasily. One cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we didn't realize." Emma interrupted gently. "That's the problem," she said. Her voice, though soft, carried weight. Assumptions, judgments, and the arrogance to act without knowing. "That is what brought us here. I suggest we correct this immediately." Passengers murmured among themselves. "Wait, she owns the airline?" One whispered to a friend. "No way," another replied. "She doesn't even look like someone who would own a business, let alone a major airline." Emma, overhearing snippets of conversation, didn't respond. She had learned long ago that humility and restraint often spoke louder than anger or outrage. She let the scene unfold, letting people experience the full weight of their misjudgment. The gate manager, still trying to salvage some control, stepped forward with a clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, we need to—" Emma raised her hand slightly, stopping him mid-sentence. "There is nothing you need to do, except acknowledge your error," she said quietly, clearly, leaving no room for negotiation. Her calm, measured tone carried authority far beyond the manager's own attempts at asserting control. Emma's gaze swept the area, landing briefly on a woman who had earlier whispered loudly about her being too poor to sit in business class. The woman froze, realizing that her judgment had been exposed, her assumptions laid bare in front of everyone. Emma's eyes, gentle yet unyielding, communicated a single unspoken message. Respect is not earned through wealth or appearances. It is the foundation of human dignity. The manager muttered something about issuing apologies and compensating passengers, but Emma cut him off again. "No compensation is necessary," she said. "What is necessary is acknowledgement and learning. Judgment without understanding is a costly mistake, whether in airports or in life." Her voice, soft but resolute, carried through the gate, silencing objections and commanding attention without the need for a raised tone. Captain Brooks' voice broke the tense silence again. "Ma'am, the flight crew is ready. Your seat is prepared. We can wait here as long as you like, but they'll need to move quickly once you're on board." Emma nodded, turning slightly toward the officers. "Then let's proceed," she said simply. "Lead the way." The officers hesitated, unsure whether to bow, apologize, or merely step aside. They chose the latter, shuffling slightly forward to let her pass. Passengers whispered among themselves, some in awe, some embarrassed, others confused. The man who had loudly criticized her moments ago stared at her in disbelief, holding his phone like a shield. Emma caught his gaze briefly, her expression neutral but pointed. No words were necessary. The message was clear. Appearances deceive, and arrogance has a cost. As Emma approached the jet bridge, the gate manager stammered an apology. I sincerely apologize, Miss Walker. We didn't realize. Emma's lips curved in a faint, polite smile. I understand, she said. But understanding now is not enough. This situation must teach the value of respect in all circumstances. That is what will prevent it from happening again. Inside the plane, the crew scrambled nervously. Flight attendants straightened uniforms, attempted rehearsed smiles, and whispered hurriedly among themselves. Emma remained calm, moving with a quiet authority that demanded compliance without coercion. She approached her seat in business class, a space previously assumed to be unworthy of her presence. Now, as she settled in, the weight of her authority filled the cabin. Captain Brooks approached, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Everything's handled now, he said quietly. Emma nodded, still calm, allowing the flight attendants to retreat without further incident. She wasn't here to humiliate anyone, only to correct a mistake and set an example. The real lesson was not punishment, but the quiet power of dignity. Passengers turned their phones toward her as she buckled her seatbelt, many snapping pictures and recording video. Emma noticed but didn't react. She understood the spectacle she had become, yet she refused to let it define her. She had not come to be seen. She had come to ensure respect and fairness. The irony of her calm amidst the chaos was not lost on anyone observing. The gate manager called again, his voice tight with nervous energy. Ms. Walker? We will ensure this never happens again. Surely. Emma's gaze met his. See that it doesn't, and teach your staff that appearances are not a measure of worth. That is all. She leaned back in her seat, exhaling softly. For the first time, a flicker of relief passed through her mind. The ordeal was nearly over, but the lesson had only just begun. As the plane prepared for departure, Emma allowed herself a brief glance around the cabin. Some passengers still whispered, unsure what they had witnessed. Others sat silently, awestruck, realizing that the woman they had judged had just demonstrated grace, authority, and patience far beyond what they had expected. Every detail of the public humiliation they had imagined had been reversed, replaced by respect, wonder, and a story they would never forget. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, letting the noise of the terminal fade behind her. The flight attendants now treated her with cautious respect, and the officers had relaxed slightly, aware that the crisis had passed. But more importantly, a subtle, undeniable lesson had been delivered. Arrogance and judgment can be instantly undone by quiet dignity and authority. The flight took off, leaving the gate and the embarrassment of those who had judged her far behind. Emma's phone vibrated again. It was a message from her assistant. The video is already trending. Social media is erupting. Emma smiled faintly. The world would see what she had seen in that moment. That dignity and calm could command more authority than anger, confrontation, or wealth alone. And in that quiet, elevated moment above the clouds, Emma Walker reflected on the absurdity of appearances, the power of patience, and the strange beauty of a world that sometimes needed a reminder that respect must precede recognition. The moment Emma Walker stepped back onto the plane, a tense silence blanketed the cabin. Flight attendants hurried to adjust their uniforms, their polished smiles faltering under the weight of embarrassment. Some clutched clipboards, others whispered to each other, trying to compose apologies that felt insufficient even before leaving their lips. Emma's calm presence filled the aisle, quiet yet commanding, drawing every gaze toward her. The irony of the situation was thick in the air. The woman they had attempted to humiliate was the owner of the very airline they served. Ms. Walker. I mean. One attendant stammered, voice quivering, her hands twisting nervously. She had rehearsed 100 apologies in her head during the tense moments at the gate, yet none seemed adequate. Emma's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. That's the point, Emma said softly. You see, apologies are not about words alone. They are about understanding why your actions were wrong and making sure they don't happen again. The attendants shuffled closer, bowing slightly as if proximity alone could atone for their arrogance. The gate manager, pale and flustered, hovered near the front of the cabin, offering a trembling, rehearsed speech about protocols and mistaken judgments. Emma shook her head gently. You are not absolved by excuses. Respect is not a rule to follow when convenient. It is a principle. Every passenger, every moment, deserves dignity, no matter how much or little they appear to possess. Passengers turned to watch, some whispering, others craning their necks to capture the unfolding drama on their phones. The young woman who had whispered earlier about Emma, looking poor, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hands gripping the armrests. She had expected the confrontation to end with embarrassment for Emma, a quiet humiliation, or perhaps some awkward tension. Instead, she was confronted with undeniable authority, grace, and a lesson in the power of poise over prejudice. Emma seated herself quietly in her business class seat, placing her backpack at her feet. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, and calm, contrasting sharply with the nervous energy radiating from the crew. She adjusted her jacket lightly and leaned back, her gaze sweeping the cabin. I will not dwell on what just occurred, she said, soft but firm, her words carrying an authority that filled the space. What matters is what happens next. How you treat people going forward will define not only this airline, but the character of each person on it. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged glances, their eyes wide with recognition of the irony and the lesson at hand. One older man, seated near the window, whispered to his companion, She's calm. She's letting them feel the weight of their mistake without a single harsh word. Incredible. The other nodded silently, understanding that this was not just an apology. It was a masterclass in leadership and composure. The chief flight attendant, usually so composed and precise, now approached Emma, hands shaking slightly. Ms. Walker, on behalf of myself and the entire cabin crew, I sincerely apologize, she said, voice low and uncertain. We made a mistake. We misjudged you. I misjudged you. Emma's gaze softened, though her calm authority remained intact. Apologies are meaningless without reflection, she replied. I hope you will consider why this happened, not merely regret that it did. That is how you truly learn. The gate manager spoke up, voice quivering, attempting to regain some control. Ma'am, please. If there is any way we can make amends, we'll ensure your comfort. Complimentary services, upgrades, anything. Emma smiled faintly, polite but firm. I do not require compensation. I require understanding. That is the only thing that will prevent this from happening again. Her calm composure and moral clarity created a profound silence in the cabin. Every word she spoke, measured and deliberate, carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. Passengers who had once whispered disparagingly about Emma now looked on in awe. Phones continued to record, but not in mockery. They captured a woman who, despite being humiliated, maintained poise, dignity, and control. Emma's quiet power was evident to all. The very air of authority she carried forced recognition without a single outburst. The young woman who had previously scoffed muttered, I'm sorry, barely audible. Emma's gaze met hers, calm yet penetrating. It's easy to judge by appearances, she said gently, but much harder to see people for who they are. Learn this now, and you will not repeat this mistake. The sincerity and gravity in Emma's voice made the apology not just acceptable, but a lesson in humility for everyone on the plane. Flight attendants continued to move around the cabin, now treating Emma with careful attentiveness, their earlier arrogance replaced by a nervous respect. Emma accepted their gestures silently, her demeanor unshaken. She did not gloat. She did not chastise further. Instead, she allowed the realization to sink in. The error had been theirs, but the lesson was theirs to internalize. The murmurs of passengers grew quieter, replaced by a sense of awe and reflection. They watched as Emma adjusted her seat, buckled in, and exhaled softly. Her calm authority had transformed the atmosphere of the cabin. What began as public humiliation had become a revelation. Dignity, grace, and patience could outweigh arrogance and prejudice more powerfully than anger ever could. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Emma's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Captain Brooks. The video from the gate is going viral. Everyone is talking about this. You've already made history before leaving Dallas. Emma glanced briefly at the screen, her expression unreadable. She did not smile broadly. She did not boast. Instead, she considered the incident quietly, thinking about the lessons it held for both her staff and the public. Social media would amplify the story, but the real victory was the education and awareness she had imparted in real time. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, ensuring every passenger was comfortable. Their gestures were careful, respectful, and attentive. Emma observed quietly, noting the subtle shift in behavior. The same staff who had laughed at her earlier now treated every passenger with heightened courtesy, aware that their actions had consequences far beyond the terminal. She allowed this small transformation to unfold without comment, letting it teach the lesson organically. The gate manager lingered near the front of the plane, glancing nervously at Emma. "Miss Walker, truly." "We're sorry," he said again, voice almost breaking. Emma nodded slightly, her calm gaze meeting his. "Actions speak louder than words," she said. "Let your future decisions reflect what you have learned today. That is how trust is rebuilt. That is how dignity is maintained." Passengers, now observing quietly, seemed to absorb every nuance of her demeanor. They whispered among themselves, some in awe, some embarrassed, and others inspired. A subtle, profound realization spread. Respect is not given freely, but earned through humility, recognition of error, and the courage to treat every individual as a person, not a stereotype. As the plane ascended into the clouds, the final traces of tension faded. Emma leaned back, her calm presence a quiet anchor in the cabin. The crew now worked with purpose, but also with reflection, each aware that their treatment of passengers or colleagues must transcend appearances. Emma's quiet authority had transformed the cabin, turning an incident of public humiliation into a lesson that would resonate far beyond the flight. In the quiet hum of the engines, Emma considered what had transpired. She did not feel anger, nor triumph. She felt satisfaction in knowing that a lesson had been imparted, one that no apology or material recompense could replace. The moment had revealed more than arrogance. It had exposed the need for awareness, humility, and respect in a world too often blinded by superficial judgment. Emma Walker, the woman who had been publicly humiliated, now sat quietly, her presence a testament to the power of patience, dignity, and authority. She had turned the situation from embarrassment to enlightenment, and in doing so, reminded everyone in the cabin and eventually Everyone who would see the videos, that respect is earned by recognizing the humanity in others, not by judging their appearance. The cabin was quiet now, a soft hum of the engines filling the spaces where whispers of humiliation and awkward glances had once lingered. Emma Walker leaned back in her seat, calm and composed, observing the subtle shift around her. Flight attendants moved carefully, still tense, while passengers who had once gossiped and sneered now exchanged uneasy looks, their earlier judgment replaced by an emerging recognition of error. Near the front of the business class section sat a woman, her designer bag clutched nervously to her chest. She had been the loudest critic of Emma's attire, the one who whispered to her companion about how poor she looked and scoffed at her presence in business class. Now she fidgeted, her hands wringing in her lap, her face flushed with embarrassment. She had thought she was making a witty observation, a harmless remark. She hadn't anticipated the power of reality meeting arrogance. Emma noticed her, of course. Her brown eyes, steady and measured, swept across the cabin. When they landed on the woman, there was no anger, no malice, only quiet expectation. Emma did not raise her voice. She did not confront her publicly. She allowed the moment to linger, giving the woman the space to realize the gravity of her misjudgment. In that silence, the lesson took root. I. The woman stammered, finally speaking under her breath, her voice barely audible, over the soft engine hum. I'm sorry. She looked down, ashamed. Her companion glanced at her, eyebrows raised, unsure if the apology was directed at Emma or at the world for the embarrassment they had collectively witnessed. Emma's lips curved slightly, a small, controlled acknowledgement. It's easy to judge, she said, her voice calm but clear, by appearances. Harder to see people for who they truly are. But recognizing the mistake is the first step toward understanding. She did not demand more, did not lecture. The clarity and composure in her tone were enough to make the apology genuine, forcing the woman to internalize its meaning. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted further. Passengers who had been silent began murmuring softly among themselves. Some admitted to whispering judgments earlier. Others shook their heads in quiet disbelief. It was clear to everyone that what had unfolded was more than a momentary spectacle. It was a lesson in humility, a living demonstration of dignity under scrutiny. The young man seated nearby, who had laughed at the notion of Emma boarding first class, now stared at her in disbelief. He had mocked her attire, smirked at her presence, and assumed she was nothing more than a traveler who had overstepped her bounds. He now shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding her gaze. Emma noticed, though she did not address him directly. Her calm authority required no words. Its presence alone corrected the arrogance and reshaped the atmosphere. Even the flight attendants, who had been anxious and flustered, now moved with a quiet reverence. Their gestures were careful, their smiles measured, and their movements deliberate. They no longer acted as though they were serving someone they had misjudged. They treated every action with mindfulness, aware of the lesson Emma had delivered. Each glance, each small adjustment of the cabin environment, reinforced the importance of respect beyond appearances. The woman who had whispered about Emma looking poor finally raised her eyes. They met Emma's steady gaze, and in that moment, a deep understanding passed between them. There was no need for words. The regret was palpable. Emma's eyes communicated clarity and expectation, but not anger or malice. Let this moment teach you something greater than embarrassment, Emma said softly, almost to herself, but audible enough for the woman to hear. Recognize value where it exists, not where it appears to belong. The realization hit the woman hard. Her judgment had been shallow, rooted in surface-level assumptions, and the consequences were now unavoidable. She had been confronted, not by anger or force, but by calm, undeniable authority the kind that exposes arrogance without a single raised voice. The lesson was seared into her consciousness. Appearances are fleeting, assumptions are dangerous, and dignity is universal. Across the aisle, another passenger whispered to a friend, "I can't believe I judged her too. I thought she was just some random traveler. I didn't even consider." His voice trailed off as he gestured vaguely toward Emma. His companion nodded, both now feeling the weight of their own assumptions. The cabin had transformed from a place of judgment and quiet ridicule into a microcosm of accountability, reflection, and realization. Emma continued to observe quietly. She did not intervene further. She had no need to. The regret, the awareness, and the subtle tension that hung in the cabin were sufficient. Her presence alone commanded acknowledgement. Passengers began to whisper about what they had witnessed, their words tinged with awe. Social media notifications flashed across phones as videos from the gate area circulated, amplifying the lesson far beyond the plane. The woman nearest to Emma finally whispered, I understand now." Her voice, small but sincere, carried the weight of acknowledgement. Emma's lips curved slightly. She did not offer forgiveness in words, but her composed demeanor was enough to convey that recognition and learning were the true measures of redemption. The rest of the flight, the cabin operated under a subtle but unmistakable shift. Respect, awareness, and mindfulness had replaced arrogance, judgment, and careless assumptions. Emma considered the situation quietly in her mind. She was not here to punish. She was here to teach. Public humiliation had been averted only by calm authority, dignity, and measured presence. She had proven that leadership and influence need not rely on anger or confrontation, but could be communicated through quiet, deliberate action. The lesson was not only for the crew, but for every passenger who had assumed, whispered, or judged. As the flight continued, the hum of engines and soft conversation became a backdrop to a deeper transformation. The woman who had judged Emma now sat quietly, thoughtful and reflective. Others exchanged glances, recognizing their own behavior and its implications. The moment had become more than an isolated incident. It was a living example of accountability and humility, witnessed in real time. Captain Brooks, walking past the cabin to check on passengers, offered a subtle nod to Emma. She returned it with a faint smile, acknowledging the mutual understanding that the lesson extended beyond the immediate moment. The flight crew now operated with quiet efficiency, their interactions with passengers careful, respectful, and mindful. The ripple effect of Emma's composure was clear. Respect had replaced assumption, awareness had replaced arrogance. By the time the plane neared cruising altitude, a tangible shift had occurred. Passengers who had whispered, gossiped, or judged now sat in contemplation, observing the woman who had faced public humiliation with unparalleled calm. Emma remained seated, observing quietly, her presence alone commanding reflection. The regret of those who had misjudged her was no longer simple embarrassment. It was an understanding that would influence their behavior long after the flight landed. For Emma Walker, the incident was not personal. It was instructive. She had witnessed the consequences of superficial judgment and the power of quiet authority to correct it. The lesson extended beyond appearances. Dignity is universal. Respect must precede recognition, and humility is essential in every human interaction. As the cabin settled into a calm rhythm, Emma allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. The woman who had judged her was no longer defensive. The passengers had absorbed a subtle but powerful lesson. The flight crew had been reminded of the importance of respect. And Emma herself, calm and poised, realized that this single flight had demonstrated what countless lectures, policies, or reprimands could never achieve: the transformative power of dignity, presence, and patience in teaching the value of respect. The woman who had whispered about Emma's appearance glanced once more at her, eyes wide, silently conveying her understanding and regret. Emma's gaze met hers briefly, a subtle nod passing between them. The unspoken communication carried weight far greater than words could convey. Acknowledgement, reflection, and the commitment to do better in the future. And in that quiet cabin, above the clouds, Emma Walker witnessed not just regret, but awakening. She had turned humiliation into awareness, judgment into understanding, and arrogance into humility. The lesson had been delivered not through confrontation or fury, but through calm authority, dignity, and measured presence. A lesson that would linger far longer than any fleeting insult. The cabin hummed with a new energy as the flight cruised steadily above the clouds. What had begun as a chaotic, tension-filled scene at the Dallas gate had transformed into a quiet, reflective atmosphere. Emma Walker leaned back in her business class seat, her calm composure now the steady heartbeat of the plane. Around her, passengers whispered softly among themselves, many still replaying the earlier events in their minds, others watching her with newfound respect. Captain Brooks, seated in the cockpit just ahead, maintained constant communication with Emma. "We're on schedule for New York," he said quietly over the intercom. "Everyone on board seems unsettled, but in a good way." Emma's response was measured. "Unsettled in their assumptions." "That is exactly as it should be," she said. There was a faint smile in her voice, the kind that carried quiet authority. Sometimes the greatest lessons come when people are forced to confront their own biases. The flight attendants moved with a newfound mindfulness, their earlier nervous energy replaced by a disciplined respect. One of them, the young woman who had whispered about Emma's appearance earlier, now handled the cabin with care, adjusting blankets and offering refreshments with a gentle, attentive demeanor. She stole occasional glances at Emma, still processing the humbling experience of having misjudged someone so profoundly. Passengers continued to murmur quietly. Some admitted to each other that they had underestimated Emma, judging her based on clothing and demeanor rather than merit or authority. A father whispered to his daughter, "Remember this moment. Never judge someone by appearances alone." Some of the most influential people walk quietly among us. The child nodded, wide-eyed, absorbing a subtle life lesson from the unfolding events. Meanwhile, Emma reflected silently on the journey. She did not dwell on anger or resentment toward the staff who had initially humiliated her. She understood that human behavior is shaped by assumptions, and assumptions can lead to errors. What mattered was how these errors were addressed, how lessons were communicated, and how respect could be restored. Calm patience, she knew, had far more power than confrontation or anger. Near the middle of the cabin, the man who had loudly laughed at Emma's poor-looking attire now sat quietly, head bowed in contemplation. He shifted in his seat nervously, glancing at Emma with a mixture of awe and regret. He hadn't expected the turn of events. What had begun as a petty judgment now left him reconsidering his own biases and assumptions. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that true authority is not about appearances, but presence, composure, and character. The gate manager, now seated discreetly at the back of the cabin, observed Emma with a mixture of reverence and remorse. He whispered to the flight attendant beside him, "We mishandled everything. I don't know how we didn't recognize her sooner, but we can learn from this." The attendant nodded, still shaken but absorbing the lesson. Every movement of Emma's quiet authority had reinforced the need for respect and awareness at all levels of service. Emma's calm was unshakable. She observed each interaction subtly, her presence silently reinforcing discipline and respect, without saying a single harsh word. Every passenger, every crew member, was aware of the quiet power she wielded, not through anger or authority granted by title alone, but through measured poise and unwavering dignity. The hum of the engines became a background to the unspoken lessons that filled the cabin. As the plane began its descent toward New York, Emma leaned forward slightly, eyes sweeping the cabin once more. She noted passengers now sitting straighter, whispering reflections to one another. The earlier chaos had given way to a subdued but profound energy, self-awareness, humility, and acknowledgement of mistakes. The boarding gate's earlier tension had been replaced by a rare and delicate understanding of human behavior. Captain Brooks' voice came again over the intercom. "We're beginning our final approach. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Everyone is calm and secure, thanks in no small part to Ms. Walker's presence." The acknowledgement was subtle, but pointed, highlighting the unspoken respect Emma had earned during the flight. The plane glided smoothly toward the runway, the city skyline of New York emerging through the windows like a glittering canvas. Emma's gaze was serene, taking in the familiar landscape, yet aware that the real journey had been far more internal than external. The lessons imparted in the cabin, the quiet, undeniable authority that demanded reflection and respect, would linger long after the plane touched the tarmac. Passengers watched the city approach with a mixture of awe and contemplation. Conversations had shifted entirely from mundane topics to reflective discussions about assumptions, appearances, and the importance of treating every individual with dignity. Emma had demonstrated, without confrontation, that true influence lies not in force or anger, but in patience, calm, and unwavering self-possession. The woman who had whispered earlier about Emma's appearance now sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She glanced at Emma briefly, eyes downcast, then whispered softly to the person next to her. I was wrong. I judged without knowing." A statement, though quiet, carried profound weight. It was an acknowledgement of error and a commitment to do better, a rare and genuine lesson learned from personal experience. Flight attendants moved with precision, guiding the passengers through the descent, while maintaining a respectful distance from Emma. They no longer treated her as a passenger, but as a figure of authority whose calm composure had transformed the environment. Every action, every glance, every whispered apology or acknowledgement reflected the deep and lasting impact of her presence. Captain Brooks' voice broke the relative quiet again. "We are moments from landing. Everyone, please remain seated until the plane has come to a complete stop." Emma adjusted in her seat, her calm demeanor reflecting the smoothness of the journey. She had not needed to assert dominance or raise her voice. The lesson had been delivered entirely through presence, patience, and dignity. The runway approached, and the engines hummed steadily, a rhythmic reminder of both the journey and the transformation within the cabin. Passengers held their breath in anticipation, but it was not fear or anxiety. It was reflection, a quiet acknowledgement of what had transpired. The earlier judgment, arrogance, and superficial assumptions had been replaced by understanding, humility, and respect. As the wheels of the plane touched the runway with a soft thud, the cabin exhaled collectively. There was a subtle, palpable energy of relief, introspection, and awe. Emma remained seated, calm and poised, allowing the moment to settle fully in the minds of everyone around her. The quiet landing had mirrored the quiet power she had wielded throughout the flight. Subtle, authoritative, transformative. Passengers began to collect their belongings, still speaking softly among themselves. They whispered reflections, sharing the profound lessons they had witnessed. Emma observed quietly, a faint, serene smile playing on her lips. Her mission had not been to humiliate, to assert power, or to command attention. It had been to demonstrate, subtly but unequivocally, that dignity, patience, and quiet authority are far more powerful than anger, arrogance, or superficial judgments. The gate doors opened, and the first passengers began to disembark. Flight attendants now moved with careful attentiveness, their prior arrogance completely replaced by respect and mindfulness. The woman who had judged Emma earlier followed silently, head bowed, reflecting on the personal growth that had unexpectedly arrived at 30,000 feet. Emma Walker remained seated until nearly the end, letting the lesson settle fully in the cabin. Then, with quiet composure, she gathered her belongings, adjusted her backpack, and stood. Her presence alone drew attention, but it was no longer judgmental. It was respectful, reflective, and quietly transformative. Passengers instinctively stepped aside, acknowledging the authority that required no explanation, no confrontation, only presence and dignity. As the last passengers disembarked, Emma gave a final serene glance over the cabin. She did not speak, did not gesture, did not demand recognition. Her calm authority had done its work. The lesson was complete. Judgment and arrogance are fleeting. Dignity, patience, and quiet strength endure. The cabin emptied with a quiet, reflective hum. Passengers carried themselves differently, now no longer rushing, no longer talking over one another, and most certainly no longer judging. Emma Walker stepped off the plane last, allowing the crew and the passengers to experience the full closure of what had occurred. She moved with measured grace, her brown eyes observing the terminal's bustling energy with a serene, calculated awareness. The New York terminal was busy, echoing with footsteps, rolling luggage, and the chatter of travelers. Yet, within the crowd, a subtle shift seemed to occur. Emma's presence created a ripple effect, even outside the plane. Those who had witnessed her quiet authority in the air carried a lingering respect that followed her into the crowded concourse. People who had only caught snippets of the incident on social media now paused, sensing that the woman who had commanded dignity with nothing but presence was near. The flight attendants, still visibly shaken, followed behind, making sure Emma was safely navigating the terminal. Their movements were careful, deliberate, respectful, a stark contrast to the arrogance and casual disregard they had displayed earlier in Dallas. Each subtle gesture spoke volumes. They had learned, they had reflected, and they were aware that their conduct would be judged not just by passengers, but by the example Emma had silently set. Passengers who had once whispered behind her back now moved with measured caution, speaking softly to each other. Some exchanged hesitant glances with Emma, unsure whether to approach, apologize, or simply observe. Many had recorded videos, now scrolling frantically through their phones, replaying the moment when a woman's quiet authority transformed a chaotic boarding incident into a profound life lesson. One young man approached her tentatively, a nervous smile on his face. "Ms. Walker, I just wanted to say, I judged you earlier," he said, voice low and sincere. "I thought, I don't know. I assumed things I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." Emma looked at him, her calm brown eyes steady, assessing the sincerity. "Acknowledging error is the first step toward understanding," she said softly, her voice quiet yet commanding attention. "Learn from this moment. Let it guide your actions in the future, not just today, but always." The man nodded, visibly relieved, almost reverent. He stepped back into the flow of the terminal, carrying with him the weight of recognition and the seeds of humility. Emma had not needed to scold him, nor had she needed to lecture. Her mere presence, paired with measured acknowledgement, had taught what words alone could not convey. Nearby, the woman who had mocked Emma's appearance in Dallas lingered. Her hands clasped tightly in front of her, she approached slowly. I can't believe I said what I did," she whispered, almost inaudibly. "It was thoughtless, and I see that now. I just wanted to apologize." Emma's gaze met hers, calm but penetrating. "Regret without reflection is wasted," she said softly, "but reflection without change is incomplete. Let this guide your actions in the future. Remember this moment, not as shame, but as instruction. The woman nodded, blinking back tears, and retreated into the crowd, transformed in an almost imperceptible way. Emma allowed herself a subtle nod of acknowledgement before turning her attention to the rest of the terminal. Every detail mattered: the hurried steps of travelers, the distracted glances of parents trying to corral children, the scrolling faces of people glued to their phones. Amid it all, she remained a calm anchor, a quiet force reshaping the environment through her mere presence. Her assistant appeared, weaving quickly through the crowd. "Miss Walker, the next meeting is in 40 minutes, he said, breathless but careful to maintain professional composure. "Are you ready?" Emma nodded, her calm demeanor unbroken. "Let's proceed. But first, observe." She gestured subtly toward the terminal, allowing the teen to absorb the environment and the subtle, lingering impact of her presence. As they moved through the terminal, passengers who had witnessed the flight incident occasionally paused, recognizing her. Some whispered among themselves, pointing subtly without breaking stride. Others approached, not to fawn, but to acknowledge respect quietly, offering small nods or murmured words of understanding. Emma allowed each encounter to pass naturally, her quiet authority teaching without effort, her presence alone reshaping the behavior of those around her. In a nearby seating area, a family watched her approach. The father, a tall man with a busy demeanor, whispered to his children, "That's the woman from the flight, the one who showed everyone how to respect people properly." His children's eyes widened, absorbing the lesson silently. The mother glanced at him, nodding, realizing that they were witnessing a demonstration of poise, patience, and quiet power far more instructive than any lecture could provide. Emma's team followed closely, maintaining professional distance while observing the natural influence she exerted over the crowd. Her assistant, still catching his breath, murmured, "It's incredible. Even after all this, people are still reacting." Emma nodded slightly. "Influence is subtle," she said. "It doesn't require loud announcements or displays of authority. Presence, patience, and consistent dignity resonate more deeply than any immediate reaction." They continued toward the exit gates, the flow of the terminal shifting subtly around them. Passengers now navigated with a more deliberate awareness, careful not to bump, jostle, or interrupt. The subtlety of Emma's impact became apparent. She had transformed the space not through confrontation, but through quiet, unwavering composure. Her authority was undeniable, yet gentle, a lesson in leadership few could ignore. A terminal security officer, observing the scene from a distance, whispered to a colleague, "I've never seen anyone command respect like that. Just by walking. No yelling, no confrontation, but everyone is different around her." His colleague nodded, eyes wide. "It's like she's teaching without speaking. Incredible." Emma reached the designated meeting area, pausing for a moment to glance back at the terminal. The space still hummed with the energy of reflection. Passengers, staff, and casual observers all carried a subtle transformation within them. Her influence had extended beyond immediate apologies. It had planted the seeds of awareness, humility, and a newfound understanding of respect. Her assistant spoke again, gently, "Shall we proceed?" Emma nodded, eyes calm. "Yes, but let's remember that influence is ongoing. Every interaction, every presence matters. Today was a lesson, but the real work is carried forward in how people treat each other afterward." Passengers and staff alike would remember this day. The viral videos circulating online would capture the spectacle, but only those present truly understood the quiet, deliberate power Emma had wielded. She had transformed humiliation into awareness, arrogance into humility, judgment into reflection, all without raising her voice or asserting dominance through force. As she moved toward the meeting room, the terminal slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Yet beneath the ordinary bustle lingered the subtle echoes of her presence. Passengers walking with slightly more consideration. Flight attendants moving with careful attention. And the invisible lesson that appearances are unreliable. Patience is powerful, and respect is universal. Emma paused for a final moment before entering the private area. She allowed herself a faint smile, acknowledging the transformation that had occurred not only in others, but in the environment itself. Her calm authority had left a quiet imprint, a lesson in leadership, humility, and human dignity that would resonate far beyond the terminal walls. And as she stepped into the meeting room, the world outside the windows continued on, unaware of the small but profound shift in consciousness that had occurred within it. Emma Walker had turned a single flight, a single boarding incident, and a single act of misjudgment into a story of respect, reflection, and lasting transformation, proof that dignity, patience, and quiet authority can reshape the world in ways no anger, no confrontation, and no assumption ever could. The meeting concluded smoothly, but Emma Walker's mind was still partially in the terminal, reflecting on the ripple effect of the day's events. She had left the Dallas gate as a passenger who had been humiliated for appearances, and now, hours later, she had walked through a terminal filled with individuals transformed by quiet authority, patience, and dignity. The lessons imparted would echo far beyond the moment, a legacy far richer than any viral video or headline could capture. Her assistant closed the meeting door behind her, giving a faint sigh of relief. "Ms. Walker, the team said this was remarkable. Even people outside the airline are talking about it." Emma nodded slowly, her expression calm. "Yes, but talk is fleeting. What matters is what people do after witnessing it. Respect, awareness, and humility must be carried forward in daily life, not just remembered as a story." Captain Brooks, seated nearby with a cup of coffee, gave a quiet nod. "It's incredible, ma'am. Watching the crew and the passengers. Even the terminal staff, they changed almost instantly. And all because of the way you handled yourself." Emma's gaze was steady, her voice measured. People respond to dignity and calm authority, not anger, not confrontation. Those things create fear, not understanding. What we did today was plant seeds that will grow if nurtured or wither if ignored. Outside the terminal, news crews had begun gathering, alerted by the viral videos of the Dallas incident. Reporters spoke rapidly into cameras, summarizing the miracle flight in which a passenger, mocked for her appearance, revealed herself to be the owner of the airline and handled the situation with grace. Yet Emma was careful to avoid the cameras, stepping aside and letting the world tell its own version of the story. She knew that the headlines would only capture the spectacle, not the subtlety of the lesson. Her assistant whispered, "Should we address the media?" Emma shook her head gently. "No, the lesson is not in spectacle. It's in how people treat each other afterward. Recognition of dignity, humility, and respect, those are the real outcomes. Let them see the videos, yes, but don't make it about me. Make it about what happened." Meanwhile, the flight attendants returned to the crew lounge, still absorbing the enormity of the experience. The gate manager from Dallas approached the group cautiously, his face a mix of embarrassment and respect. I still can't believe what happened," he said quietly. "I misjudged everything. The staff misjudged everything. We don't even know where to start to make this right." One of the attendants, the young woman who had whispered about Emma's appearance, spoke softly. "We start with humility. We start with awareness. And we carry it forward. That's what she showed us." Emma's lesson extended far beyond the flight, far beyond the terminal. Passengers who had witnessed her quietly command respect now reflected on their own biases. Social media amplified the story, showing a woman who handled humiliation with grace, transforming judgment into awareness and arrogance into humility. Articles emerged, analyzing not just the incident, but the leadership principles embedded in her actions: patience, quiet authority, and the undeniable power of dignity. In the days following, emails and messages poured in from passengers, crew members, and observers worldwide. People shared their personal reflections: how they had judged too quickly, how they had assumed appearances indicated worth, and how a single display of calm authority had reshaped their understanding of human behavior. Some wrote about applying the lesson in their workplaces, in schools, in their homes. The ripple effect was expanding, touching lives in ways Emma could never have anticipated, yet had hoped to inspire. Back at Walker Air headquarters, Emma called a staff meeting. The Dallas incident became a training example, not as a tale of embarrassment, but as a lesson in leadership, humility, and respect. What happened was not just an anomaly, she told the team. It was a mirror. It reflected human assumptions and biases. It showed us what happens when respect is withheld, and what happens when it is restored through calm authority and presence. Let this guide all interactions, with passengers, colleagues, and each other. The staff listened intently, the story no longer about Emma's appearance, but about the principles she embodied. Policies were updated to emphasize respect and awareness. Training programs were revised to include reflections on human behavior, bias, and humility. The lesson became institutionalized, ensuring that the impact of a single flight would echo through every future interaction, every boarding gate, every cabin, and every terminal in the airline's network. Emma herself returned to the air, but the flight was different now. She noticed subtle shifts in passengers' behavior before boarding, in crew interactions, and even in the quiet efficiency of the gate staff. The world had changed, not because of spectacle, but because of a demonstration of quiet authority that compelled reflection and inspired genuine transformation. Each boarding became an opportunity for awareness, each interaction a chance to reinforce respect, each journey a lesson in dignity. On one particularly quiet flight, a young boy approached her tentatively, holding a folded piece of paper. "Ms. Walker," he said softly, "my mom showed me the video. You handled it really well. I want to be like you, calm, but strong." Emma knelt slightly, smiling faintly. Strength isn't loud. It isn't about being feared. It's about being aware, patient, and standing firmly in what is right. Remember that, and you'll be stronger than anyone who judges you superficially. The boy nodded solemnly, inspired not by spectacle, but by an enduring example of leadership and dignity. Emma's influence spread further than she could ever measure. Airlines, schools, corporations, and social media discussions referenced the Dallas incident as an example of modern leadership. How humility, patience, and quiet authority can command respect and inspire reflection more effectively than force or anger. Videos circulated, but they were accompanied by thoughtful commentary, debates, and discussions on bias, judgment, and the power of presence. Even those who had initially ridiculed her reached out privately, expressing regret and sharing how the experience had changed their perspective. One former critic wrote, "I thought appearances defined authority. I see now that true authority is calm, dignified, and aware of its power. You taught me a lesson I will carry my whole life." Emma replied simply, "Learn from it. Let it guide your actions, not your words. That is all that matters." Emma Walker had transformed what could have been a humiliating incident into a lasting lesson in human dignity. She had turned assumptions into awareness, arrogance into humility, and chaos into calm reflection. The legacy of that single flight and the quiet presence she carried became a touchstone for leadership principles and human interaction worldwide. And as Emma looked out over the runway at sunset, the golden light reflecting off the windows, she reflected quietly on the journey. The lesson had extended far beyond Dallas, far beyond a single flight, far beyond appearances. It was a reminder that respect, patience, and calm authority are the most enduring forms of influence, and that true legacy is measured not in wealth or spectacle, but in the lives touched, the biases corrected, and the awareness inspired. Emma Walker, once judged for looking poor, had taught the world a profound truth, that dignity, calm and quiet strength leave a legacy far greater than any fleeting judgment. And that respect is the currency of true leadership. And in every terminal, every cabin, and every heart she touched, that legacy lived on.